Hi there, it's Silver. This is Anode Heart. So this is a creature catching RPG with some pretty neat ideas and a very different combat system from what is the sort of usual for the genre. This is in no way trying to be like Pokemon. You could say it's got a lot of differences. But the first thing to talk about is, of course, how the game looks and how its presentation is. And that's definitely a high point for the game because it's using a really interesting art style where the world itself is sort of combining with like an analog and digital world put together. So you may be going through rolling grassy hills that have like RAM chips and CPU fans sticking out of them and stuff like that. Or you may be looking across the ocean and see like circuit board traces going through the ocean and things. It's a really cool visual style. It's also a very cute style when it comes to the characters and creatures. Pretty much everything is sort of adorable, and you've got this sort of, classic chibi-ish style for the main exploration gameplay, but during combat you get these more detailed sprites for the creatures, and they all look really good. And it all comes together to create a very interesting art style for sure, and this is combined with the music, which is also really solid. The battle music is, kind of upbeat, but also a little bit mysterious in some way, but the standouts for me are a lot of the exploration tracks that you'll hear around the various areas. You've got this, kind of sad, somber music in places like the Rainlands and the lower bits, which are in quite sad areas. I mean, they have ghosts and stuff in them. And then my favorite has been the Haunted Mansion area, which has just awesome spooky music that sounds great, and I want to play wherever I go. I just really like the music in that area. I think it's fantastic, and that continues through all the areas. They all have some really fitting thematic music that sounds really good and combines with this interesting art style to create this atmosphere of a sort of lost world, is how I would put it. It's a world that has kind of it's dying. I mean, in the universe of the game, it is actually sort of being compressed out of existence, basically. So the fact that everything sounds a little bit lost does make a lot of sense. But of course, the main reason you're here is for the gameplay. So how does all that work? Well, a lot differently from pretty much any other game in the genre that I can think of. So you do have, of course, your monsters, your creatures. They're called Tama, and you don't actually catch them, but we'll get onto that in a minute. You've also got a limited backpack space, although it's pretty large. It's not super small. And you have a bank that allows you to store anything that you don't currently need. So you do have a lot of resources when it comes to being able to take what you need and grab things to take with you and stuff like that, because you do actually need a fair amount of consumable items and stuff for catching, in quotes, various Tama, because you actually have to make them like you, basically. There aren't any Pokeball-like items. Instead, you have to basically toss them gifts in combat. And if they like the gift, then they'll have a higher percentage chance of actually coming to you after you beat them and asking to join your team, and that's how you actually get more of them. And as you would probably expect, some of the rarer and more exotic Tama have rarer and more exotic tastes. So if you want to have a higher chance of actually being able to recruit them, you gotta find out what they like. And some actually really love very specific items, and if you can give them a couple of those, then you can get to a 90 or even a 100% chance of having them ask to join your team after you beat them. One full team is 3 Tama in size, and you will sometimes face against other NPCs and stuff that do have full teams of 3 as well. You can also have 3 in reserve that you can switch out at any time. They actually do get experience from battle, but it doesn't show it. It shows the main 3 that you have on your active team. It shows what experience they get, but even though it doesn't show it, your other 3 in reserve do actually get some XP as well. And of course, you've got a sort of bank that allows you to store any unused Tama and switch them out whenever you want. So you'll sometimes come across these blue terminals that will let you switch them out, as well as eventually you can recruit a character that runs a sort of ranch, and you can even get some breeding and stuff going on too. So it does have all of those systems that you would expect from a game like this. There are no random encounters in this game. All of the enemy Tama that you'll face are actually walking around, and you have to physically run into them in order to battle them. And if there are a bunch of them together, then you can actually do a chain battle of multiple to get some bonus experience for your team. And there will of course be many NPCs that want to battle you as well, depending on the areas you're in, that will have their own teams. And the way battle works is pretty interesting. So the first thing you'll notice is that you're not limited to 4 moves per creature. Instead you have 8. And you're also not necessarily limited to 1 action per turn. You'll see at the bottom of the screen in battle there's this red and blue gauge, and this is sort of like an action point gauge, basically. And when it's to the left in the blue side, that's your side, and exactly how high it goes is shown by that white bracket symbol that is related to the speed stat of the Tama you're currently using, and it'll fill up to that mark on your turn. and each of your moves has a different cost. TP is what it's called, time points. And yeah, each move has a different TP cost and will use a certain number of those points, and you can use as many moves per turn as you have points for. So you can do several attacks at once if you want. And the interesting thing is your turn ends when you run out of points or you pass, but you can actually go into sort of a deficit if you want to. You can use attacks that cost more points than you actually have, but it'll push the gauge into the red, into the enemy's side, and they can also do the same to you. Now this is actually sort of a strategy, because as long as you keep the deficit that you create below that white bracket, then you're not actually giving any points to your enemy, because they will automatically regen up to that bracket no matter what. So if their bracket is at 5 points and you give them 2 points, they don't start with 7, they'll still just regen up to 5. But if you give them more than that bracket, then they'll keep the extra and they'll be able to use more moves on their turn than they normally would be able to. So sometimes it's a good idea to use a couple of small moves to get yourself down to like 1 TP left, and then use one really big move at the end, as long as you make sure that it doesn't put you in the red to the point that you're giving the enemy extra points than they would have regenerated at the beginning of their turn. Or maybe you actually do want to give them extra because they have very few moves left, or because you just feel that it's maybe worth the extra damage or something like that. It's a pretty strategic way to do things, and I really like the idea of being able to, I guess you could call it like a tug of war kind of system. It's like a tug of war back and forth between you and the enemy, trying to use your points as efficiently as possible while making sure not to give your enemy too much of an advantage. This is also related, by the way, to the order of the 8 skills that you have. One cool system is you can actually learn a whole bunch of moves for each Tama. You don't have to replace moves. You don't have to worry about like unlearning and relearning them. They all keep whatever they've learned, and you can just put them in order however you want in order to determine which 8 of the various moves they have learned that they can use in combat. But the third and second to last moves of the 8, they have a 1.5 times cost, so they cost more TP than they normally would cost at base. And the 8th move has a 2 times cost, so it costs twice as much to use. So the order does matter. And as a way to partially balance how this works, the fact that you can do so many things per turn, you'll notice that all of your Tama's moves have a very low number of uses, represented by those green pips next to the move name. And unlike in something like Pokemon, where a move might store 20 or 40 uses, you usually only have like 2 to 4 of them in this game. But they refresh after each battle, so you're encouraged to switch up your skill use in battle, because you know that after the battle's over you get them all back. But the interesting thing about this is, just like the time system, you can also use these even when you're out of uses, but the more you do so, the more recoil damage you take from actually doing it. And if you use it repeatedly up to the number of uses it originally had, so say if it has 3 uses and you use it 6 times, on the 6th use you'll basically take the exact same amount of damage that it deals out every time you use it, so it will eventually become untenable to keep doing this. But this is also another part of the strategy, because if you notice your opponent only has a couple of moves, you might decide to give them a bunch of extra points of time on purpose so that they keep recoiling and damaging themselves. Using an item also doesn't end your turn. Any sort of consumable usage takes 2 TP, so no matter what it is, it takes 2 of these points. And this also counts for gifting an enemy Tama something that also takes 2 points. You can also, of course, switch out to your other 2 that you're not currently using in battle whenever you wish. And you do, of course, have to worry about type advantages and stuff like that, too. That there are various elemental types at play here, and some of them also have some special interactions that you've got to be aware of, too, because there are the usual, like, this does double damage against this type, or this does half damage against this type. That sort of stuff is here, and each Tama can learn various different types of moves. But you've also got a couple of other things to worry about, like hitting a fire type with a water type move doesn't only do extra damage, but it also slows it down. Whereas if you say hit an electricity type with an also electricity type move, it'll power it up. There's also this really neat learning mechanic that I really like. So one of your Tama's stats is wisdom, and wisdom influences their dodge rate, but also their learning rate, because they can actually learn moves used by enemies. So it does the normal thing of each Tama learns specific moves at different levels as it levels up, but that's not the only way you can get new moves. As far as I know, this game doesn't have like TMs or HMs. It doesn't have consumables that teach moves, although there are some consumables that use moves. But instead, If a Tama sees another move used against it in battle, it has a chance to actually learn it. Different types of Tamas have different elemental types of moves that they can possibly learn, and this is how they do that. So sometimes when they see a move used in battle, they could learn it after the battle's over and add it to their list of things they could equip, which is a pretty cool idea. And if you see the move used more often, then you have a higher and higher chance of learning it, and if you combine that with the Tama's wisdom stat, that also boosts up your chance to learn it. Leveling works a little bit differently in this game as well. You do have the basic, you destroy enemies, get XP, and level up. But in addition to the stat growth that you get from leveling, you also get these points called potential. And you can go into the party screen whenever you want and spend this potential to increase stats of your choice, which is something that I really like. So you're not entirely reliant on the stat growth per level, and instead you can actually influence the stat growths by leveling up the stats that you want. And as each stat gets higher, it'll cost more and more potential to keep leveling it up. Also, a lot of Tama in this game have a very low maximum level. You're not going to be getting something to level 99. A lot of the starter ones have a max level of like 13 or so. And the way that this works is you can actually reboot a Tama whenever you want after you pass a certain threshold, and this will reset their level to 1, but it'll give you a bunch of potential to spend on them dependent on the level they were when you reset them. So despite their low level caps, if you keep leveling and rebooting them, you can make them really, really strong. This is also important because there are evolutions in this game, and a lot of Tama that have evolutions have multiple evolutionary tracks they can go through. So say at like level 16, this will evolve into a specific form, but if it's level 16 and has a really high strength stat, it'll evolve into a different form. So a lot of them have multiple different tracks of evolution they can go through. And when you reboot, it resets them to their base form, so this means if you want to try and get them to a different evolutionary track, you can do that after you reboot them. Oh, and one other thing to mention that I really like, by the way, is that whenever you breed a Tama that has a bunch of moves they've learned from enemies, all of the stuff they learned actually transfers to their offspring. So if you have a Tama that's been around a whole bunch and has learned a whole bunch of moves like blue magic style from other enemies, you can actually keep those in the child. So the main point of the game, aside from all this catching and battling, is to go around this really interesting world and recruit characters to come back to the sort of home area and grow it. So you're actually doing various tasks at different parts of the world in order to get people to trust you and then come back home with you, basically. And you get their cards, which determines how many total people you've recruited, and there are various gates around the world that need a certain number of these cards in order to open. And this is a pretty cool idea because not only does it give you a good reason to explore every area and talk to everyone to see who wants to come back home, but it also gives you a really good sense of progression because as you recruit more and more characters, new structures will start to pop up around your home area, and new people will set up shop, and other new NPCs will come along and stuff, and it'll feel like it's getting bigger and bigger and actually going from just like a sort of a dump with one building to like an actual small town. And as you keep going and recruiting more people, eventually you'll have stuff like an arena to fight in, and a restaurant to look at, and a big inventors area to go to get more gadgets and stuff. And it's a pretty cool idea because it gives you this sense that you're actually making a difference in the world because you actually tangibly see this place getting bigger and more bustling as you go. There are also several other mechanics that I haven't detailed that you'll come across as you recruit more characters. You can play a card game that actually has pretty detailed rules if you want. You don't have to play it if you don't want to, but there are even like booster packs for you to find, and it works a little bit like the original Pokemon TCG, but with some other differences. It's pretty neat, actually. You'll eventually unlock this glyph system that allows you to explore around areas and find these glyphs that you can use to actually transfer moves between different creatures. And there are also other various gadget-based things that you'll find along the way, and this is a game where you want to complete as many of these side quests as possible, because they don't only give you, like, some money and stuff like that, but they also tend to give you new NPCs that have some new stuff they can do for you, as well as sometimes entirely new mechanics that get added just from doing side quests. And the story is actually pretty interesting because you are trying to figure out what is actually happening with this world and why everything is so like digital bleeding into reality. It's a neat idea, and I think it creates a pretty cool atmosphere. So for $18, I would say this game is absolutely worth it. That's a very good price for how much content is in the game. Considering all the stuff you can do, there's like over 150 creatures to find, there's all these biomes to explore, and a ton of side quests to do that actually have some meaningful rewards and stuff. So yeah, definitely a lot to enjoy here. If you're a fan at all of like JRPGs or creature catching RPGs like Pokemon and stuff, then definitely do check this one out. It does a lot of stuff differently and very well. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'll put the link in the description below this video, as always, to the Steam store page for Anode Heart, and I'll see you guys next time.